culture, in our nation, in our families, in the church, in our personal lives. And when we talk about walls, what are we talking about? Barriers or else? What else? Roadblocks, yes. Protection, all right? From that which we don't want to get inside. And there are a lot of things that's infiltrated our lives, our country, that look, what is going on? So they're boundaries, aren't they? That's what a wall can be, a boundary. We don't allow things to pass through, or we don't cross over ourselves. In our marriages, right? Don't you need walls of protection around your marriage? And so an unwalled city was vulnerable to anyone that would come in and take what they wanted from it. And that's been Jerusalem for around 100 years. They've not addressed the wall. They attempted it once, as we saw last week, and that was failed by just some minor opposition. So even though they've rebuilt the temple, sacrifice has been reinstated, there's been worship, the walls are just laying in disrepair. And the 12 gates around Jerusalem, well, they stand burned. And that's where we left last week when Nehemiah was made aware of that. And we find that the summary of what happened in chapter 1 all the way through chapter 2 and verse 9 is where we left off. First down, he sat down and wept. Remember that? So there's some steps. We got to sit down and weep over that which is broken. Because if we don't have a burden for it, a real passion, we'll never be committed to fixing it. Second of all, what did he do? Well, yeah, that was the weeping. But what did he do? He prayed. That's when he fasted. In other words, you got to go to the right source to get the right help. He prayed to God, and we remember, how many days? And does anyone remember how many was? We studied that last week. Yeah, it was like 4 months. And how long did it take to build the walls? He spent a lot more time in praying to God than they did in work. Success is going to be finding it in God. And then he acknowledged his position, because it says at the end of chapter 1, and I was cupbearer to the king. Well, what are you going to do? What do you know about such kind of construction? Are you a project manager, an engineer? What kind of background do you have? So it doesn't matter. I have a relationship with the king, and I'm going to go in there and ask him for help. So he prayed for success, didn't he? So he went in there, and I have this last point, leveraging your relationships. Did he take a bold move asking the king for time off, letters of authority, to go down and secure the timbers and protection, and to go down there and buy it? And now, what did he not ask the king to do? And you made this point last week, which I thought was very profound. Well,
he didn't ask the king to do it. He asked himself to do it.
Did you hear that? He didn't come to the king and say, "Look, king, my country's in disarray, that the walls are torn down. Could you go down there and fix it?" No. He didn't ask someone else to do it. He asked for permission to go do it himself. Isn't that interesting? I thought that was very important to point out. So that was last week, and now we're in lesson 2, and it's going to cover chapter 2, verse 10, or actually 11, all the way through the end of chapter 3. We won't be able to deal with chapter 3 in its entirety because of time, but I want you to read it, but we'll give it a quick overview. And we're going to see in this lesson, Nehemiah is going to make a careful assessment, the work that needs to be done. Because you can't do the work if you don't know what actually needs to be done. Then second of all, he's going to invite other people to join him. That's very key. And then thirdly, we're going to find the priests were the first to volunteer. And the high priest is mentioned as working. What does that teach us before we get there? If the leaders aren't willing to work, will the job get done? And will there be success? And we're going to find it started from the top down. And then finally, all the families are going to be included. Everybody could do something, and it's very interesting. Some of the people and their professions that are mentioned, how they chipped in and worked it as well. So now we're going to find ourselves in chapter 9, just to catch ourselves, or chapter 1, verse 9. transition into this lesson. So look there in verse 9. He says, if you return to me and keep... Oh, that's not right. That's not verse 9. Oh, chapter 2. Yeah. I knew what I was doing. I was in the wrong chapter. Verse 9 of chapter 2. Then I came to the governors of the provinces beyond the river. What river would that be? Euphrates. All right. And gave them the king's letters. Now the king has sent with me officers and the army and the horsemen for protection. Then Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about it. It was very displeasing to them that someone had come to seek the welfare of the sons of Israel. We're going to find a resistance from within the camp right from the beginning. Now, let me ask this. It's obvious. But did the opposition come when he was grieving? No. Did it come when he was praying? Did it come when he was making the request? When did it come? When it says, I came. When he actually is doing something, people, what are you here for? What are these soldiers here for? What are these letters? Now you're going to get opposition. People could care less about talk. They could care less about us you even protesting. Because there's a big difference between talking and doing, isn't there? And when you start doing, that's when you're always going to get opposition. And I'm talking about spiritually, most of all. And we talked about that briefly last week. Jesus promised it. That if they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. Because if we're of light, living in a dark world, people are going to try to put out the light. And the hardest thing to get used to as a Christian, I can't say that. I'm speaking for myself. One of the hardest things for me to get used to as a Christian is dealing with conflict from without and then within. Because I just get this idea that, everyone's going to love the Lord. Everyone's going to love peace. Everyone's going to love loving, right? And so when you get people resisting and pushing back, it makes you first question what? Yourself. Am I doing what's right? Maybe I'm one that's wrong. Then after a while, you get comfortable. No, it is true. What I'm doing is right. And the reason people object and resist is because there is just evil in the world, isn't there? They did it to Jesus. They're going to do it to us. So 800 miles, he is committed, isn't he? And that's where we find out what happens. Now, let's read this next section. We'll make some comments about it. Because here's about the idea of assessment. Verse 11. So I came to Jerusalem, and I was there 3 days. And I rose in the night, so this is going to be a secret mission, and a few men with me. I didn't tell anyone what my God was putting into my mind. How do you think he did that? Don't know. But he's been praying, hadn't he? But he says this is God's job, not his own. That's important for you to know. What God was putting my mind to do for Jerusalem, and there was no animal with me except the animal which I was riding. What does that mean? Why would he say that? What was not with him? He didn't have a security detail, people on horseback, right? He's all by himself going out by night because it's going to be just a clandestine assessment. So I went out at night by the valley gate in the direction of the Dragon's Well onto the refuse gate. We're going to mention these later. Inspecting the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were consumed by fire. Verse 14. Then I passed on to the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was no place for my mount to pass. So I went up at night by the ravine, inspected the wall, then I entered the valley gate again and returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done, nor as I had yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the rest who did the work. So here we see his inspection, or he's going to make assessment, surveying the wall, because I want to know what needs to be done. A couple things I want to point out to you. The word inspecting, it's a medical term for probing a wound to see the extent of its damage. When you're doing triage, you're trying to figure out who you're going to treat first, the most severe. Say, this guy's got a broken leg, it's sticking out. They take him in, and what does the doc do? He goes in there and he does a careful inspection, see if there's bleeding or what's going on and how many legs, bones, how it's broken. They always make careful assessment, that's what he's doing here. So surveying, yeah, we've got to build this wall, it's down this far, and we're going to need this blocks, this many workers here, we're going to need timbers here for this gate. You can see what he's doing? Now he's doing it by the secrecy of night, right? In the darkness, just with a few men with him. And then notice the assessment, of course, we know the walls are broken and the gates are burned. But he doesn't tell us more than that, except he just makes us circumference around the city, doing this careful assessment. Then we find out that no one knows, so I'm going to ask the question, why the secrecy? Yes?
Well, if he's wanting to evaluate what he really has, he doesn't want people to put a show or to change any of the circumstances of what he's actually seeing.
Okay.
So, if you keep everybody away, you get a true fact.
Going to get an honest assessment. I want to be done to repeat what he's saying so everyone know, because everyone is going to be involved. Will there be some people that want to sugarcoat the problem? All right? And other people want to maybe make it worse than it is. All right? And we'll come back to that idea. Yes?
Well, with what Bruce was saying, if he's going to lead the reconstruction of the wall, he had to assess, as you said, inspect and make sure that he, first of all, if he's going to be leading this, knows what the requirements are, how much is going to be needed, and the only way to do that and to lead it is to make that careful assessment.
All right.
So he's going to come back with the knowledge without them knowing that he has done this.
So they can't sugarcoat it over. Yeah, Eva?
Well, and he doesn't want the enemies to know what he's doing either.
Yeah, he doesn't want opposition. So he's doing this privately so he can get things in motion before they can ramp up against him. Is that what you're going to say?
Because he already knows about the opposition.
Uh-huh.
And so he wants to get the lay of the land first
Okay.
and prepare for that.
All right, and in this kind of mission, what also you learn about it's very personal, isn't it? This is Nehemiah's burden. He's going to spearhead it, so he wants to know intimately what needs to be done. He's not asking others to do it. He's personally involved, all right? And so, and that's why you'll see the words when he talks to the nobles and leaders. He says, we. He doesn't say you, we. And so it's very personal to him. It's his job, his mission.
When they did the temple and God gave craftsmen abilities beyond their own scope to do,
Yeah.
he did that. I'm sure with Nehemiah, he's given him abilities in order to not only properly assess, but then to recalculate and to do that. And I'm sure God's working with him.
Maybe. Maybe. You said his God's good hand was with him, but to how that played out, yeah.
One of the things that I see absent here is he went through this whole area and wasn't challenged once, which tells me there was no defense
Yeah.
set up.
There's no guards on the wall, are there? Yeah.
There was nothing there. That
Yeah.
would be if this is my city, I'd be wanting to see it protected somehow.
And we're going to ask the question why that is. It's interesting. Some only focus on good. Is that true in all life? And they're deceiving themselves that all is well. And we say, well, whoa, that's the person, the cup is always half full, right? And I say always, because sometimes the cup is half empty, isn't it? Now, what is the kind that's always positive and is blinded to the problems around us? They're living with rose-tinted glasses. They don't allow themselves to see the problems that are at hand. Why would some people be like that? Because they don't want to feel accountability, maybe? Is that what you're saying?
Because if they don't know what's wrong, they don't have to do anything about it.
Oh, and if you don't know what's wrong, then you don't have to respond. That's all. So you live in this gilded cage. Yes? Anybody else? What? Have you ever done that and met someone like that? Everything's perfect. Everything's fine. A lot of times when you bring up things that are a problem, people get defensive because they think, well, you're pointing fingers at them. No, we're not pointing fingers. Just we got a problem here. We're not casting blame. Now, does Nehemiah cast any blame in any of these discussions? I just want you to ask the question as we read through it. He never is pointing finger. He's not being critical because some people only see what is wrong, don't they? There's some people that are good Monday morning quarterbacks. They'll tell you why the team lost the game on Saturday or Sunday, right? They'll tell you the coach was an idiot. The quarterback, I could play better than him. They can tell you everything the team did wrong. Have you met someone like that? They always can diagnose and lay out the church and say, here's what's wrong with the elders, here's what's wrong with the preacher, and here's what's wrong with all the members, and that woman over there. And they'll just lay it all out and diagnose it like, see how smart I am? And they've just decimated the church, chopped it up, and they walk away patting their back. And it just bleeding there. And I can say that because I've done that. Never offering a solution, but always quick to tell what's wrong. Now, some people are really good at that. They're always critical. They're quick to criticize. Now, is Nehemiah either of those? Is he bold enough to look at the walls and see what the problem is? And is he brave enough to say, we're going to do something about it? And that's what seems so marvelous about him. He's not on one side or the other. That he can look at the facts and devise a solution. Because you can't come up with a plan if you don't know what the problem is. If we're not honest enough to look at it or just don't see it for what it is. He'll devise the plan, then he's going to rise up to action. That's what we're going to see. So that's why he's going out at night. He's starting, he wants to create a vision, and then he's going to share that vision with others, and as they begin to own it, man, this amazing things happen. Yes?
You were talking about people finding Paul.
Yes.
These three guys, Sanballat, Tobiah, and
Yes.
tried everything they could think of to stop it.
Yes, we're going to see their names come up later. Yeah, they're going to be persistent.
Were they kings of another place? Who were they?
We'll save that for a second, but they're, I think, have it coming up, I believe, the answer to that.
We need to rebel against the king.
Yeah. Well, they asked that question, are you rebelling against the king? Because they're ignorant. They don't know Nehemiah's coming with the king's authority. So when they ask that question, they don't even know what they're saying. It's interesting. Proverbs says this, whoever has no rule over his own spirit, that's self-control, is like a city broken down without walls. What is that saying about a person? If they can't control their temper or their spirit or their desires or whatever, you're like an unguarded city. Yeah, you're subject to being led by anyone that comes along or just provokes you or, yes, you're an unguarded person. And I say that because on a personal level, do we have to be brave enough to make assessment of our own lives? To look at ourselves and say, are there things I need to honestly fix? Are there things I really need to work on? Is that difficult to do, to look in the mirror? It's extremely difficult because, first of all, I get it's defensive. No, I didn't. I do everything perfect. You know, that's my attitude, right? And so it's difficult to do that. Is it hard to do it when we're looking at the church? Now, again, some people are quick to always talk negatively about the church. My first point is, when you're talking about the church, you're talking about yourself. That's the first point I want to make, right? It's not they or those guys. When you talk about the local congregation, who are you speaking about? Yourself. So be careful. Anything you say about those guys, you're talking about yourself because you're part of it. Is that not true? That's why they say when you point the finger, three are pointing back at you. Yes. That's the second thing. The church, 1 Corinthians 3, is the temple of God. And it says, he who destroys the church, God will destroy him. That's pretty strong language. God does not take lightly for people cutting up the church, just dissecting, being critical, without offering a... So here is going to be my first suggestion. Bring your analysis of what we could do better. Suggest where we're falling short. But don't bring the solution or the problem unless you have a solution. Is that fair? Because that shows you have the heart of Nehemiah. You made careful assessment with the intention, here's what we can do to make it better. Is that a good idea? And if you say, well, I don't know what to do better. Well, then counsel with someone before you start broadcasting all the problems. Because There's nothing that will cause a church to lose enthusiasm and energy than people that complain and run down the brethren. Isn't that true? It can just destroy just the spirit of a congregation, of a family, or even of a country. So, does that mean we stick our head in the sand? No. Come up with a solution and couple it to the problem that you detect. Is that fair? All right. So, I have to make honest assessment. No exaggeration, because often we can make things appear worse than they are or better than they are. And usually it's somewhere where? In the middle, okay? So would you think that we could do a better job at evangelism in this area? So what if I said, we're terrible at evangelism. We just don't, no one's being saved here in Salem. What have I just done? Exaggerated. And made it worse, and it made people feel terrible, but it's not true, right? It's not true. Yes? Well, even in this congregation, I know it's happened. There's people been brought to the Lord. So to say no and never, those are exaggerating words, right? So, but always have an attitude, I'm bringing this up because we want to act and make it better. I love the words of Paul about when he talks to the Thessalonians about love and hope and faith. He says, you're doing these things, but I want you to excel still more. Get better even at it. So it's always with a mind to act, to make things better. So again, no solution, no comment. I think that's a good rule to go by, even in a marriage, right? Before you bring up a problem, think about a solution. So then it comes across as positive, doesn't it? Rather than just complaining. All right? Sure? You want to talk about your wife? With this being said, this one here. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I said I did a fair amount of research of the condition of the Lord's church right now. And this article chronicles, here it says attendance is down 7.8% from 1990, even though our United States population is increased by 90 million or something like that. There's a problem. When it comes to youth that leave the church, like going off to college or just grow up and become adults, 50% of them are falling away from the faith. An average of 200 churches fold every year, just quit. I mean, because they get gray-haired and there's no more members and they just fold up. And so the question is, why? Now, it's easy to point fingers. Well, people aren't preaching. They're not sharing the gospel enough. There's a lot of factors. Because when you look across the board, of all the denominations, they're all increasing. Did you know that? So it has something to do with our culture and the society in which we live. There's the first connection. So it's not just about us. It's something about the culture in which we live. All right? But that's not fair, just to put it off of that and walk away, because we still have our head in the sand if we just don't make careful assessment. Because our children are under our control until they leave home. So where is the direct correlation to them staying faithful or not? It's the parents. 100% it starts with this. Well, no, the culture around us sucks them into the world. Who's in charge of our child while they're growing up in those formative years? I am. You said, well, what can you do different? That's where we have to make careful assessment and come up with good solutions, because if we're losing half of our kids, as soon as we raise them up in the church, they leave and go off on their own, something we're doing isn't working, because it hasn't always been 50%. Another factor is we're having less babies. Is that true? People are getting married in later years and having less babies or no babies at all. Does that affect the population in the Lord's church? Yes. But that's interesting. That's not church growth through evangelizing. That's just from within. I mean, you're evangelizing your child, don't get me wrong. But it's a different kind of evangelizing, isn't it? And a lot of churches are growing, but it's really transfers. So is that really growing? For you to increase, another congregation has to decrease. So the number stays the same. Elders. A lot of congregations don't have elders anymore. A lot of churches are getting so smaller, they can't afford a minister full time. Now, when you don't have a preacher or a teacher who can dedicate themselves, what happens to the level of teaching? Often, it starts to decline. And then we start this cycle, right, downward. Now, making critical assessment requires also then a critical solution. Now, that's not the purpose of our class right now. But where is this congregation going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Because many of the white-haired people won't be with us. And how many children do we have in the back on a Wednesday night? They used to be full on Wednesday nights, didn't they? But that number's been decreasing as well, hasn't it? So what's going to happen in 5, 10 years? If we're aware of what's going to happen and we make good plans now, we can reverse it and make it go the other way. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it. I just want to suggest that this is nationwide, this issue. So it's not just something I'm bringing up here. All right? It's interesting. The largest growing population segment of our society are Hispanics. They're like 70 million in the United States, the last I read. And yet they're the smallest part of the growth in the church. But yet, overall, they tend to be the most religious. Largest growing population sector, but the least evangelized. But yet the most religious or spiritual minded. So there's a lot of things when I'm saying take a careful assessment. There's lots of things we can look at, from our families to our children to our classes to everything we're doing, so we can excel still better. It's not to be critical. It's not to make people defensive. It's just we always have to be in this constant assessment of what we're doing so we can always get better. Because it's always fluid. It's dynamic, isn't it? A church always changes. Was that a hand or a yawn? All right.
I'll take the question. I don't know if this study showed it, but I've seen some of this too, because I've seen congregations that are growing. And two things that have changed is relationships, of how we know one another, and lack of church discipline. And I've seen that up and down the whole West Coast. And I know eldership booklet that was being put together by a few people. In fact, Will Williams was involved with it. And there were people that were reached out to ask what one of the hardest things was in the early 90s in church. And many elders were contacted and interviewed privately. The number one thing was reaching out to people and trying to get to know one another and how to help correct one another in a preventative and a curative way.
Yeah.
We hear the word church discipline and we think punitive so much.
Right.
But it goes back to